This is Dr. Justina Agnieszka Chevallier. In my next chapter is entitled in a very challenging way because it appeals to physics. Chapter 5 is entitled What are regeneration and growth? What are expansion and what laws of energy distribution are like when we assume limitless expansion of universe? So it is a question, and in this chapter I pretend to answer that question, which means it is an intent to answer it in as comprehensive way as possible. Remember, those videos are synopses of the book and do not replace the lecture. However, they are comprehensive enough to enable persons to feel safer and also adapt this new philosophy to more of an accurate, realistic approach in everyday life, be it personal or professional. When it comes to assumption of limitless space and abundance, these terms as buzzwords often appear in spirituality, such as What the Bleep Do You Know and many other movies. What does this mean? It means simply that we actually expand when others expand, when it comes to personal growth, as well as number of children, and in productivity, if that is preferred, versus in personal life as meditation or enjoyment of life, in perception of happiness that self is source of, and perception of the selfless happiness in others. Distribution of goods, and an example of that is, for example, if there's a large apple tree and that apple tree has many apples, do I gain or lose if there are 5 persons around it if I actually have more apples than the person next to me having those apples on that tree? And when it is that I live an illusion, meaning I live in an illusion that it is my loss, that I do not have the same share, or if I having more win over the person who has less. It is always when two components that are false, and you need to understand that, are present. First one is reduction of human body to description as if human body was not always in correspondence to the area or environment around. So external was not imprinted in senses, emotions, behaviors and impulses, urges and physiological needs, based on actual needs. The best example that I always give of that is, if I feel like water, it is because as my thirst increases, my suffering in that thirst pushes me into action, which is called seeking behavior, to find the largest, if that's appetite, apple tree, or the largest water. And that, when that is suppressed, it means that there's another person or persons or animals, and one needs to be aware of all, that is more deprived than I, and therefore needs those apples more. What tells me and each of us about it? Lack of appetite or aversion to foods from one extreme, that is, for instance, allergies. Despite an item being healthy like apples, I cannot have it because somebody else, by enjoying it more, or more extreme, by craving it, fighting for it more, is deprived and would be actually causing harm to me if I did not let go of 5 or 10 apples or occupying the whole tree, as opposed to sharing it. And law of abundance is an assumption that I am as whole a body, trustworthy, and so is everybody else in all of own internal perception and expressions to self, a source of information about external environment in precise and appropriate way, which means if I feel aversion, that certain sense is not corresponding. For instance, I feel hunger, but in fact I am presented with water. That means that I actually do not have corresponding seeking behavior to find the right item. What does this mean? Am I really hungry or am I in a wrong place? Well, it means I am in a wrong place. Simply that. And that is what body, when we trust our senses as opposed to pathologizing and medicating patients and selves, tells us as information, including bodily movements. And ladies and gentlemen, trust me, not all in this universe, because of how hyper precise and demanding having a child and an opposite gender lifelong partner is about sex. In fact, very little is, and that distortion often creates wrongful interpretations. Who is source of information? Self. What tells me that I am in the right? Pleasure. I moved to the next tree and allowed persons to enjoy this one. And there I am by myself and I can fulfill my needs because my hunger was less, or I was less numerous than persons present in the area, and that means I am safe and those persons are safe from pursuing each other in aversion for an item, and that is law of abundance, meaning as an internal detection mechanism, my hunger told me where there are apples, my thirst told me where to seek water, and then my joy or appetite and capacity to eat versus restraint tells me, am I actually in the right place? Or by aversion, if I move east, west, north or south, I actually will find abundance somewhere else. And I, because if thirst is non-suppressed by adrenergic response, am in the right if that decreases and appears somewhere else. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, law of abundance, meaning there is no one predestined to be lost and killed or degenerating, because all of us, we are unlike bonsai tree. What does this mean? It means that humans, the same as animals, we are not tied up to die, and there is no such thing as a quota of past wrongdoings, for instance, past killings in life, that makes a person for sure they're predestined to be dead, no matter what kind of diagnosis that person obtains. So what is in fact the law of growth? The law of growth is, in a natural state, a law of expansion that is unlimited, and that means that person who is large in size with a lot of fat tissue is healthy and simply has additional adipose tissue to use in times of cold, in times of efforts, unless, ladies and gentlemen, that is expressed in medical terms in obesity related diseases like hypertension, like inability to move and slowing down coronary artery disease, and also many diabetes mellitus, many other diseases of that internal medicine area, and also infertility and PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, many of those things that halt reproduction. Why? Because that person constantly has something, unaware of it, that is at this point of time suffering or dying to accumulate in the weight of that person, be it derived from plants or derived from animals. And that is law of scarcity, and marks areas of so-called starved obesity, such as in Mexico, for instance, where even children there are cases of type 2 diabetes mellitus in children, and it is not death verdict, but chronos means on the clock. area of improvement for, ladies and gentlemen, economists, politicians, also persons who plan distribution of goods and agriculture. And it is remediable by prompt planning or changing the area following impulses for a place in which seeking instinct is an appetite, is for what is alive and thriving, like an apple from being eaten, or like a grape. Why? Because then an excrement, for instance, or a person spitting out a seed actually plants those plants. And using those does not kill them, unlike, for example, an excessive large area of wheat or sugar that in time results indeed because we have to kill to produce just one product based on artificially designed, non-intuitive, in ignorance of body, suppressed non-stop with medication, as opposed to led against aversion, away from aversion, towards happiness and joy, because that's the right direction, and then limit less and less so, being guided by escaping from fire or bondage like in bonsai. So regeneration is for all, and that shortening of telomeres in medical knowledge, we need to remember telomere, ladies and gentlemen, is a protein, and that protein has and follows the same rights and has the same properties as muscle, brain, and other tissues. If it does not have property to regrow and expand, when there is safety assured in the area and sufficient provision in thriving for all, that is propitious to regeneration, as opposed to effort marked in accumulation of tissue for large efforts, in losing weight, in expansion of masses that are trapped somewhere in the skin, because we trap something and ingest outside of the area, and then that tries to become no nuisance inside of the body. And what it means, there was once a very interesting broadcast on a station called NPR in Houston, Texas. In that broadcast, that person related a story from own laboratory, or related a story of a laboratory of scientists, in which a species of cancerous cell would extracted from a patient continue independently multiply without a deadline. And that is important to understand. Every cell has the same property in humans, and removal of a cell to grow outside of body is like replanting a potato, and is a well-known method for Western also practitioners of modern and Chinese medicine, such as a person that I had not pleasure to meet, but I had pleasure to meet a patient of, and who was hiding that external and internal medicine a principle in shame. And you see, it is science what a person who has growth can consume in proportions to what grows around that person, and what that person has to from own body liberate to become like that expanding commensal, in fact, organism, such as in a forest, for example, a mushroom that grows, and the same is like a cancer or bacteria, and is so-called commensal. Commensalism is growth that is beneficial, in the least non-harmful to all of us, and all cells have the same property. To say that growth and regeneration have to be enabled means there is no need for excessive effort and work, because nothing is crying in pain for help, being actively injured or dying. And that is when the regeneration, including telomeres, takes two ways. Either cells regrow and aging is reversed without excessive or any manipulation, or persons actually have as if a human was a lump of cells, and a mechanism in which certain parts of body and brain adapt to the same function or improved function. And sometimes if area cannot be fast enough modified, it is okay to change area to be able to survive and suffer so-called epigenetics, which is change of genome makeup to be able to live and thrive in cells as well as in